At 11:57 p.m., deep inside Olynya Air Base in the icy Arctic Circle, General Sergei Volkov sat in his control tower, swirling a glass of cognac as he studied the digital map sprawled across his screens. Every red dot represented millions of dollars in Russian military assets, hypersonic missiles, stealth cruise weapons, and Tu-95 bombers, and tonight all of it was pointed at Ukraine's heart. For months, Volkov had meticulously prepared what he called Operation Iron Strike, a decisive, surgical strike designed to crush Ukraine's drone network and cripple its command centers. To him, success would mean glory, medals, and a place in the annals of Russian military history. Failure, he thought, was impossible, but Volkov had no idea that what he was celebrating wasn't real. It was a carefully crafted illusion, a trap set by Ukrainian minds months in advance. 3 months earlier, in a dimly lit basement on the outskirts of Kiev, a group of Ukrainian engineers, former film set designers, and military tacticians gathered under flickering fluorescent lights. Among them was Anton, a man who had spent 2 decades constructing movie sets for European blockbusters, and Colonel Yevin, a master of maskirovka, the ancient Soviet art of military deception. Their mission was deceptively simple: create a ghost so real that Russia would destroy it with everything they had, thinking it was a key command hub. Colonel Yevin spoke calmly, almost theatrically, as he unrolled satellite images and blueprints on the table. "We don't need bombs. We need perception to fail. If they think this is the target, every missile they fire will play into our hands." They called it Sector X. Over the next 12 weeks, they meticulously constructed the illusion of a high-value Ukrainian military base. Reinforced plywood formed the walls of faux bunkers, industrial pipes mimicked ventilation shafts, and wooden towers simulated radar systems. But the brilliance wasn't in the structures. It was in the thermal and electronic deception. Ordinary electric heaters were placed inside the wooden shells to mimic the heat of server rooms and command centers. Signal emitters broadcast constant, encrypted-looking radio traffic, ensuring Russian satellites saw activity 24/7. By the time Sector X was complete, it was indistinguishable from a real operational hub. From above, on infrared imaging or through the electromagnetic spectrum, Sector X looked like the busiest, most critical nerve center in all of Ukraine. The deception went even deeper. In November 2025, Ukrainian intelligence identified a Russian mole, Victor, working inside their logistics department. Instead of arresting him, the SBU turned him into a double-blind asset, feeding him just enough confirmation to convince Moscow that Sector X was authentic. Victor photographed crates being moved into the decoy site, which were in reality filled with sand and gravel. He reported their positions, locations, and inventory as if they were top-secret munitions. Russian analysts, starved for actionable intelligence, took the bait and funneled the information to General Volkov, who believed he now held the keys to victory. Back in Murmansk, the Russian airbase hummed with activity. Temperatures had plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius, frosting the tarmac and coating the bombers in a thin layer of ice. Ground crews scurried under floodlights like ants, handling the delicate process of loading Kh-101 cruise missiles, Iskander-M ballistic missiles, and Zircon hypersonic weapons. Each weapon represented millions of dollars. The hypersonic Zircon alone cost $15 million per unit, capable of Mach 9 speeds and plasma shielding that made it almost invisible to radar. 40 of these were designated for Sector X, along with 80 additional missiles earmarked for distraction targets across Kiev and Lviv. In total, the strike force represented over $500 million in strategic assets, and Volkov believed it would obliterate the decoy, or so he thought. Meanwhile, in Kiev, the real Ukrainian command center buzzed with tension. General Z, the architect of the trap, watched live satellite feeds of the Russian missiles heading towards Sector X. The air defense teams operating Patriots, NASAMS, and Iris-T systems were poised to react, itching to fire. But General Z remained calm. "Let the decoys do their job," he instructed. "Only intercept the missiles headed for civilian infrastructure. The rest, let them pass." The gamble was extraordinary. If Sector X appeared even slightly suspicious, Russian command might abort, or worse, redirect the missiles toward actual Ukrainian assets. The team relied on months of careful planning, physics, and psychology to ensure the illusion would hold. As midnight approached, the first missiles launched from submarines in the Black Sea, their white-hot trails cutting across the Arctic night sky. At Olynya, Tu-95s climbed to 30,000 feet, and Kh-101 cruise missiles silently detached from pylons, their tiny jet engines whistling as they accelerated. On Moscow's digital maps, the red dots seemed to cascade towards Sector X like a wave of fire. Volkov poured himself another glass of cognac, imagining the headlines: "Russian precision cripples Ukrainian drone network." Then came the impact. The Zircons struck first, detonating the 1,000-pound warheads against the wooden facades. Thermal signatures melted the heaters, radio signals went dark, and smoke rose into the cold night air. Soon, Iskanders and Kh-101s followed, landing precisely where Ukraine had intended, underneath Underneath the wooden floors, thousands of tires and barrels of industrial oil had been pre-positioned. As the missiles hit, they ignited massive secondary fires, sending black smoke plumes 2,000 feet into the sky. To Russian satellites, it looked catastrophic. A seemingly invincible Ukrainian base destroyed in minutes. Volkov allowed himself a triumphant smile. He believed he had won, but in reality, nothing of value had been destroyed. Sector X was a carefully constructed ghost. Every crate of sand, every heater, every signal emitter had done its job. No Ukrainian personnel were harmed. The illusion was perfect. The only thing Russia had accomplished was spending hundreds of millions of dollars on plywood, heaters, and sand. And then came the counterstrike. Hidden hangars opened, releasing swarms of Grim 2 kamikaze drones toward Olynia Air Base, 200 miles north. These weren't ordinary drones. They were radar-absorbent, AI-guided, and programmed to navigate valleys, rivers, and shadows. Their targets were Russia's own bombers, parked for refueling and maintenance. Within 30 minutes, fuel trucks exploded, 2 95 bombers melted under secondary detonations, and support crews ran for their lives. In a single coordinated strike, Russia had lost 4 Tu-95s, 2 Tu-160 bombers, dozens of missiles, and essential infrastructure, all while Ukraine spent a fraction of the cost. The math was staggering. For every dollar Ukraine spent, Russia lost $325 in strategic assets. Psychologically, the damage was even greater. Commanders questioned their satellites, analysts accused each other of mistakes, and soldiers doubted every order. Sector X had not only destroyed hardware, it had undermined trust, perception, and confidence within Russia's military hierarchy. By the first light of dawn, Kiev watched quietly as smoke and fire rose over Olynia, evidence of a meticulously planned, brilliantly executed decoy that had shattered the Russian war machine. By 6 a.m., the Arctic sky over Olynia was streaked with smoke and orange fire. From the air, the devastation looked like the aftermath of a full-scale nuclear strike, yet the reality on the ground was a carefully orchestrated masterpiece of deception and precision. Russian command scrambled to assess the damage, but every sensor, every satellite image, every intercepted transmission told the wrong story. Sector X had been destroyed, and Volkov's confidence had been replaced by panic. In Moscow, analysts began furiously calling the general staff, trying to reconcile what the satellites had seen with what was physically possible. The first reports reached the Kremlin by 7:15 a.m. Screens lit up with thermal images showing intense heat signatures from what appeared to be the destruction of a high-value Ukrainian command hub. Officers celebrated cautiously, unaware that the triumph was an illusion. For them, this was supposed to be a decisive moment in the war, a knockout blow that would secure strategic advantage for months, if not years. They had no clue that the illusionary Sector X was nothing but wood, sand, and heat-mimicking devices. By the time Volkov received the official damage report confirming Sector X's destruction, Ukraine was already moving its pieces for the next act. Inside Kiev, General Z monitored the situation like a chess master observing the final moves of a game he had already won. The Ukrainian team had achieved the impossible, an asymmetric victory of both mind and material, for a cost of just $1.81 million. A few $1,000s for plywood, tires, barrels of oil, and AI-guided drones. They had forced Russia to waste $500 million in missiles, bombers, and fuel. More than that, they had planted a seed of doubt within the Russian military that would fester for months. Every map, every report, every drone feed would now be questioned. The first phase of the counterstrike at Olynia had been only the beginning. While Russian commanders assumed they had eliminated Ukraine's drone command network, the real network remained intact, secure, and undetected. Hidden drone launch sites and AI-managed control systems continued operations undisturbed. From the shadows of bunkers deep beneath Kiev, Ukrainian engineers watched their decoy wreak havoc, their expressions calm, their confidence absolute. Every Russian calculation, every expensive missile fired, had been prepaid with Russian rubles but executed with Ukrainian ingenuity. At Olynia, the Grim 2 drones had struck with surgical precision. 4 Tu-95 bombers were destroyed, 2 Tu-160 White Swans were severely damaged, and multiple fuel and ammunition depots were obliterated. Ground crews were killed or scattered in terror. By mid-morning, reports indicated at least 30 personnel dead and dozens injured. The loss of high-end strategic bombers was a blow Russia could ill afford, and the destruction of missiles meant weeks of production downtime for replacements. The Arctic base, once a symbol of invulnerability, was now a monument to overconfidence and miscalculation. The psychological aftermath extended far beyond Olynia. Russian generals convened emergency meetings to understand how their most sophisticated intelligence had been deceived. Analysts debated endlessly. Was the satellite feed manipulated? Had the Ukrainians planted false signals? Could a mole have fed them inaccurate coordinates? The answers were partially correct, but the brilliance of Ukraine's plan was that they had leveraged every single assumption Russia had made against them. It was a perfect alignment of logistics, technology and psychology, a trap built not just to kill, but to humiliate. Meanwhile, the global military community took notice. NATO analysts, previously skeptical of Ukraine's capabilities, pored over the satellite imagery, the debris patterns, and the calculated hits. They were stunned. Low-cost deception and AI-guided drones had destroyed high-end strategic assets worth hundreds of millions. Commentators speculated whether future wars would be won not through superior firepower, but through information manipulation, misdirection, and ingenuity. The lesson was clear. The side that knows its enemy's mind can bend reality itself to its advantage. In Kiev, Anton and Colonel Yevhen reviewed the footage of the destroyed decoy, now rendered completely blackened and smoldering by Russian missiles. They didn't celebrate. Instead, they observed silently, knowing that the real victory was invisible. The SBU double-blind operations with Victor had ensured that Russia's mole believed he was feeding actionable intelligence, when in reality he was delivering the very blueprint for his own army's humiliation. The mole had unknowingly played the perfect role in a tragedy scripted by his supposed adversaries. By late afternoon, the financial toll of the operation became clear. Russia had lost $590 million in hardware and infrastructure, $400 million on the 40 high-end missiles destroyed over Sector X, $140 million for the bombers destroyed or damaged, and $50 million for fuel, ground support, and ancillary equipment. Ukraine's investment of $1.81 million made this one of the most cost-effective strategic operations in modern military history. Each dollar spent by Ukraine had extracted $325 worth of damage from Russia. Beyond money, the operation had also eroded confidence, shattered assumptions, and sown doubt, an intangible but devastating strategic weapon. The human aspect of the strike was equally dramatic. Russian bomber crews, pilots who had trained for years, now sat in destroyed mess halls or wandered frozen tarmacs, trying to salvage what remained. Volkov, once poised for fame, now sat alone in the control tower, staring at his empty glass, realizing that every success report he had sent to Moscow had been false. For the first time, he understood the true cost of arrogance. Soldiers questioned their orders. Officers questioned their satellites. Intelligence analysts questioned their own colleagues. The very fabric of the Russian military command had been destabilized without Ukraine firing a single missile at their main base. As evening fell, the Ukrainian command center prepared for the next phase. While Russia reeled from the psychological and material blows, Ukrainian forces continued operations, leveraging the confusion to intercept logistical convoys, monitor troop movements, and disrupt communications. Each move built on the previous one, demonstrating the principle that war is not just about destruction, but about perception and control. By nightfall, the story of Sector X and Olynia began to circulate globally. Analysts described the strike as a modern masterpiece of deception, the most cost-effective strategic operation in decades, and a new paradigm in military innovation. But in Kiev, the team remained composed. For them, it was a reminder that ingenuity, patience, and precision can turn even the most expensive weapons into ineffective symbols if misdirected correctly. The operation also left a chilling message for Moscow and the world. The more you rely on brute force, the easier it becomes for a clever enemy to use your strength against you. Russia's high-tech missiles, their $500 million investment, and their most advanced bombers had been neutralized by plywood, sand, heaters, and AI-guided drones. Innovation had trumped inventory. By the end of the second day, the psychological and financial shockwaves continued to ripple through the Russian military. Satellite operators began double-checking every feed, generals hesitated before authorizing new strikes, and the Kremlin was forced to reallocate strategic priorities. Meanwhile, Ukraine quietly began preparations for the next decoy. Perhaps a fake airfield, perhaps a phantom ammunition dump, perhaps an entire ghost brigade. In the modern battlefield, perception had become reality, and the illusion of control could be as deadly as any missile. Sector X had proven that strategy, psychology, and cunning could produce victories that brute force never could. As dawn broke over Kiev, General Z allowed himself a small smile. The war, they knew, was far from over, but the message had been sent loud and clear. Even the most formidable force can be undone when it fights shadows, not reality. Ukraine had achieved more than a military victory. It had orchestrated a masterclass in asymmetric warfare, psychological dominance, and strategic brilliance. For every soldier, every general, every analyst, and every strategist watching the fallout, the lesson was unmistakable. Never underestimate a mind that moves faster than any missile, and never assume what you see is ever truly real.